Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. We're so excited to have you join us as we kick off National Consumer Transparency Week with a timely discussion around how consumer perceptions about transparency have evolved and how the CPG industry has innovated to meet those needs. I'm Rishi Banerjee. I'm the Senior Director and Head of the Smart Label Program here at Consumer Brands Association. Again, very excited to have all of you join our discussion today. Before we begin, just some quick housekeeping items. And first, I'd like to hand it over to our Director and Counsel, Lauren Berkowitz, to provide an antitrust reminder.
Hi, everyone. Um, Quickly sharing our antitrust reminder, as is the practice, whenever we bring members together, we ask that you familiarize yourself with the antitrust policy, which has been placed in the chat. In brief, we want to ensure that the conversation is focused on regulatory, legislative, legal affairs, policy strategy, and does not involve discussion of pricing, market allocation, mention of vendors or suppliers, which can invite the risk of an anti-competitive dialogue. And with that, back over to Rishi.
Thanks, Lauren. Just some other quick housekeeping items. At the end of this webinar, we'll have a Q&A section. So please hold your questions till the end, where you'll be able to raise your hand and ask your question directly to any of our presenters, or you can always just use the Q&A function within Zoom. Additionally, the webinar is being recorded, but if there's specific information or slides that you like, definitely reach out and we can get those over to you. With those items out of the way, I'm so excited to introduce our speakers. First, we'll hear from Wendy Reinhardt-Kapsack. Wendy is the president and CEO of the International Food Information Council, a nonprofit 501c3 research and education foundation focused on effectively communicating science-based information about food safety, nutrition, sustainable food systems, and serving the public good. Prior to joining IFIC, Wendy served as the president and CEO of Produce for Better Health, now known as the Foundation for Fresh Produce. At PBH, she guided the foundation's efforts with hundreds of public and private partners to advance fruit and vegetable consumption for happier and healthier lives. Under her leadership and through a 2-year transformation, the organization launched the Have a Plant movement, which today inspires millions of consumers to eat and enjoy more fruits and vegetables every day. Wendy earned a bachelor's and master's degrees in nutrition and exercise science from the University of Missouri, University of Missouri Columbia and James Madison University, and she completed her dietetic internship at Yale New Haven Hospital, an affiliate of the Yale University School of Medicine. Next, we'll hear from John Phillips. John is Senior Vice President of Customer Supply Chain and Smart Packaging at PepsiCo. John has been with PepsiCo for over 38 years, working in several different sales and field operations roles since joining the company as a route salesperson with Frito-Lay. Before his current role, John was VP of Customer Delivery Systems for Frito-Lay, where he led the development of new DSD delivery systems, the creation of B2B e-commerce platform, Snacks2U, and the next generation of frontline DSD handheld computers. John is currently responsible for working with PepsiCo's largest customers on supply chain and collaboration initiatives to drive effectiveness and efficiency across the shared supply chain. He also leads PepsiCo's 2D Smart Packaging initiative. John is a member of Consumer Brands Association, Smart Label Executive Council, FMI's Supply Chain Committee, CGF's Data Driven Value Chain Committee, and he's on the CGT, Consumer Goods Technologies Executive Council, and the Global GS1 Data Excellence Board. Before joining PepsiCo, he spent 10 years in retail store operations with Jewel Food Stores and was a territory sales representative for Procter & Gamble. John also holds an MBA from Southern Methodist University. And finally, we'll hear from Scott Mobley, Technical Director at Clorox. Scott serves as a key stakeholder for regulatory product strategy industry engagement and compliance. Scott also sits on our Smart Label non-foods implementation committee, and he holds a PhD from the University of Arizona. With that, again, we're so excited to have these distinguished speakers to join us here today. Consumer transparency has really become front and center, and there's so much noise happening in the world right now. And so we thought it might be really helpful to kind of have a focused conversation and talk about consumer perceptions around transparency and again how industry is leading in this space. So with that, let's go ahead and dive right in, and I'll kick it off with Wendy. Wendy, over to you.
You bet. All right. Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be part of this conversation today and share some insights with you, particularly when it comes to food, nutrition, and health. I know we're going to be talking about non-food consumer goods as well as consumer packaged goods within the food industry. I'm going to share most of my information related to food, nutrition, and health and the implications for both on and off-label communication. It was mentioned that my name is Wendy Reinhardt-Kapsek. I'm president and CEO of the International Food Information Council. And again, just really grateful to be with you here today to talk about a very important topic and one that consumers are demanding more and more of. I'm going to provide a few disclosures before I begin. So IFIC is a nonprofit organization. We're focused on both education and consumer research and really to communicate science-based information on food safety, nutrition, and sustainable food systems, serving the public good. IFIC is governed by a board of trustees, the majority of whom come from public academic institutions, along with a broader assembly that also includes government liaisons. So we have a really nice tripartite governance structure with industry, academia, and government. And IFIC is supported by the broad-based food, beverage, and ag industry. Unlike a lobbying organization, IFIC does not lobby and does not represent any product company or industry. And you're going to see here today that really I'm representing the consumer point of view and perspective and what matters to them. So the vision for IFIC is one where a global environment where science informs food decisions. And so for us at IFIC, that certainly means food safety and nutrition and agriculture-related science. It also means consumer research and behavioral science and what really is behind those consumer perceptions and maybe even the actions that they take. Now, one of the ways that one of the things they consider oftentimes is information. And in the case of IFIC, we're looking at science-based information on food safety, nutrition, and sustainable food systems, and really making sure that we're effective communicators of that information. That information, as I noted in my title, can be on-label information as well as off-label communication. Now, at IFIC, we're focused on three primary things. One is best-in-class research and consumer insights and to inform a broad set of food, nutrition, and health stakeholders. And again, thrilled to be with you today. The other is to promote science communication to positively impact consumer behaviors and public health. And so science communication for us is two things. It's the effective translation of that information, but then also the effective communication of that using science communication principles to hopefully impart that information in a way that's helpful to people and informs their food and beverage decisions. And then we convene critical thought leaders to advance the dialogue. And that's a really big part of what we're doing today is to get together, talk about these issues, and hopefully improve science-based decision-making along the chain. Now, IFIC does consumer research, and that will be the focus of my presentation here today. We focus our consumer research in three core areas, and I am up for any questions that you have related to this research or even previous experience on any of these topics. Happy to share. We have three specific areas. I'm going to focus on one today. The first one, though, is when we do a special commission project. And as it relates to what we're going to be speaking about, IFIC did a huge research project on front of pack labeling. And you see even some of the visuals here. All of that information, including the study instrument, is available on our website, ific.org. Happy to address any specific questions around that research. this is where we go really deep. And in the case of this front of pack research, which we're thrilled for the support of many of the companies on the phone, is we were really partnering also in a loose collaborative approach with the Food and Drug Administration to understand what research they were doing, mirror their research or replicate their research, and then also kind of ask some additional questions that maybe we felt like would add to the discussion and advance the dialogue. So that's one example of the research IFIC does. We also do monthly spotlight programs, or we call them our spotlight surveys. This is of 1,000 Americans, and it's usually about a hot topic. And there's a lot these days, whether that's seed oils or protein or grass, or food recalls. You name it. We've probably done a quick spotlight survey on it to take the pulse of what the American public is thinking. And again, all of those are available to you on our website, ific.org. And again, happy to answer any questions, even if we do it offline. For example, you're like, oh, do you have some insights on this? Happy to share. And what I'm going to be sharing most of the insights from during my presentation will be this annual food and health survey. IFIC has done the food and health study for the last, let's see, 20 years. And so I'm going to share with you some insights from 2025. And in some instances, you're going to see where maybe perceptions have changed over time. And again, there's so much data that we have, all of it's publicly available. If you have any questions, again, don't hesitate. And remember, for all the speakers, put your questions as they're coming to you in the Q&A portion so we don't lose them. Now, for the Food and Health Survey, the methodology is slightly different than the monthly program or even those special commission research projects. In this case, we have an online survey, 3,000 Americans, 18 to 80 years of age. It's typically fielded the same time every year, and it takes about 20 minutes to complete. When we're looking at the research, we can what we might say in research data land, we can look at it lots of different ways. You can slice and dice against different variables and kind of go even deeper than you would see here in the presentation today. Who exactly is feeling this way? And what if we look at it by people who also say that they feel this way or have this behavior? And we can usually find some really interesting insights. As we kick in to the actual data, some of these slides, they are going to be data heavy. I want you to have all this information and ask questions as it's coming to you. Again, all of this is available on the IFIC website. In fact, this first slide, it was just released a week or so ago. This research is new for us. It was in November, and it was really looking at the Food and Health Survey data with a focus on food production. And I chose this to be the first slide because this really is getting at food production related purchase decision factors and going all the way back to knowing where their food comes from. So you see there at the top, 59 or nearly 60% of Americans say that, yeah, it's important to me to know where my food comes from. Now, if you go down that list on the left-hand side, you're going to see knowing food is consistently available in local markets. Knowing if the food maybe is bioengineered or contain bioengineered ingredients, knowing that food was produced with animal welfare in mind. And then it goes down the list, talking about how the workers were treated, knowing if the food was produced using other, for example, on-farm techniques. And then knowing that the manufacturer, now we're getting closer to the consumer, shares my values. And we see an uptick in this particular data point, knowing whether the packaging is recyclable or not. There's a lot of, given this list, there's a lot of information that consumers would really love to know. And some of this information is available, for example, straight up on the label of a package today. And some of it we wouldn't really have room. So we would need to go to some type of off-label communication to really impart this information to consumers, particularly those that are seeking it out or report that it's very important to them. Not every bit of information about where the product came from is important to everyone. But for those that do want the information, we want to make it easy for them to find. So we'll set the stage there. Now, as we move closer to the consumer, and when it comes to their food and beverage products, there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of information that connects, let's say, a certain product attribute to a product's healthfulness. And what's interesting is not all of that information is necessarily readily available on the label or requires additional information. So, one of the things, there's a huge long list here. And what you see on the left-hand side is the criteria that Americans say is important to them when they're seeking to define a healthy food. And on the left-hand side, you see similar, criteria that people mention in terms of a product's healthfulness, but to a lesser degree. And actually, we have a definition for healthy, and it's been, it's out there, but this is more in the context of what consumers are thinking about, not just with what might be deemed healthy on a label, but how they view overall food and beverage choices. So, what we see here, and this is an increasing trend, is that a good source of protein is the number one criteria used to define a healthy food. We see that followed by fresh, low in sugar. It has or is a good source of certain vitamins or nutrients. I'm going to draw your attention to the next one, minimal or no processing. We see an uptick here. And we see that another uptick when it comes to that protein, along with a good source of fiber. And this in terms of consumers deciding what criteria they would use for healthfulness. It also very much aligns with what, let's say, they say they'd like to consume more of and or less of. And then you see a couple other, if you go to that right-hand side, what do people still mention, but maybe to a lesser degree than those top 10? And so you see non-GMO, low carbohydrates, low in total fat, saturated fat looks like it's up a little bit. So there's many criteria that consumers use, some more than others. And again, if we looked at this data, let's say by a certain demographic group, we might find that there could be some differences in the positioning of these criteria. Well, nearly 6 in 10 Americans, and this is an uptick over the last year, do report that they are following a specific diet or eating pattern. And we've seen this as a rising trend since 2018. Now, the number one criteria for a healthy food was high protein, and we see that coming out here as well, or reinforced here. High protein is the number one dietary pattern that consumers say they're trying to follow, and that is for several years now the most common diet that they report trying to follow. Some of the others in that list too, you see that those two may also, like a low carb, for example, may also fall into that same pattern. And what are consumers looking for? And I bring this up is because not only maybe are consumers looking for a specific production practice or a specific criteria that's connected to a nutrient, they might also be looking for a benefit. And this lends you might find something like this on the label. You may get more information off the label. And so what we see here, I like to say it like this: people want to look good and they want to feel good, or shall I say they want to, no, it's equal. 40% say that when they're looking for a benefit from their diet, it is energy, feeling less fatigue, weight loss, weight management. Closely followed behind healthy aging, digestive health, and heart health. Some of those that might also be connected, for example, to that high protein desire are muscular health, strength, endurance. So these may be represented as a claim on the front of the package or a structure function claim, for example. Or consumers may be looking for additional information related to the benefits of their food from other sources. Again, really data heavy slide. Take your attention to the dark blue. So those top two sources are nutrients that they're trying to consume more of: protein and fiber. You see it at the top. Vitamin D, calcium. These are nutrients of concern as you start to go down the list. meaning ones that we want to consume more of that people are often falling short on. And then you see at the bottom there, saturated fat. These are ones that consumers say they're trying to limit or avoid. And what's really important here is a lot of this information around these nutrients of concern, whether that we should be consuming maybe more of them or potentially less of them. This information is available on the label today, specifically the nutrition facts panel. Now, when it comes to food labels, what do consumers say that they're looking at? So, when we give folks a list and we say, what information do you look on the food and beverage package when you're deciding to purchase it or maybe even eat or drink? This is what they say. And for many in my field in food and nutrition, we would think, oh, yeah, they're looking at the nutrition facts panel. No, they're looking at the expiration date. And some of this may be connected to a couple of things. One is people's concern. They don't want to necessarily eat anything that's past its quality date. They also maybe want to consider how they might reduce food waste. So how can I keep something, for example, a little bit longer? I may be looking for an expiration date that's further out, as an example. And we know that consumers, yes, are concerned about food waste, but people are also very concerned about how much money they're spending on their food. And consumers recognize that food prices have increased over the years and have seemed to stay there. So we see the expiration date, the nutrition facts panel, the ingredients list, a uptick here. And a lot of people do point to the ingredients list as it relates to where they might look to see if a food is processed, for example. I think I have a data point in here on that as well. They look at the calorie information on the front of the package. So they're looking for the calorie or nutrition information on the front. We also see an uptick here from previous years. Cooking time, preparation, the brand names, statements of nutrition benefits, statements about health benefits, statements about the absence of certain food ingredients, free from types of claims. So what we note here is that there's a lot of information that consumers could look up for on the package today. And in fact, when we see all these up arrows, it lets us know not just what pieces of information maybe consumers are looking to more or less of, but the idea that consumers are looking for the information on the package. And they're using, or they report anyway, that they are using more pieces of information on the package. Now, I noted, ultra processed foods. This is certainly a topic that consumers are hearing more about. They even note that they have a greater familiarity, for example, with the term ultra processed foods than in previous years. And if we asked the question like, well, hey, how would you decide if a food, for example, was ultra processed? People do say that they look at the ingredients list, maybe they look at the nutrition facts panel, and then we ask a number of other items related to on-package statements, like I would look for things on the front of the package. If you start going down that list, you see other off-label types of communication, the location in the store. I would look for maybe, I would ask a friend or a family member. I might use an app of some kind. So consumers, when they're making decisions, yes, they're looking at the label. They may even be looking at more parts of the label than ever before, but they're also going to, when it comes to some of those hot and emerging topics, they are looking on label, but also off label. And we'll get a little bit more into information sources right here. I want you to have all this information. It is on the website. I'll make sure that the CVA team has a PDF of these slides so that if you just want what you saw today, you can get access to just that information as relates to our discussion on transparency. This is a big one, and I'm going to show you two slides. One is, where do people most often get their information about what to eat or avoid? And then I'm going to tell you a little bit more, who do they trust? So down the left-hand side, you see that when it's where do you get your information most often? It's people, it's a health professional. If you see one on an annual basis, maybe there's other health professionals that you're coming into contact with. This is a source of information for you. In fact, we see an increase here. Family and friends hold the number 2 spot. And I think this is very important because family and friends are in close proximity to you. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are a source of science-based information, but they do trust their family and friends, and so they may ask them about it. After family and friends, you see health-focused website. Maybe people will read a scientific study. More people say they're doing that, or a conversation even with the registered dietitian or nutritionist. Now, what about social media? Because this would be something that most people have access to on a daily basis, multiple times a day, probably even more than their healthcare professional. So half of Americans say, hey, I do see this kind of content online. And while it's down from last year, we do see that and maybe trust is even down a little bit. We do see a younger demographic, it's not on the slide, but is accessing this on a more regular basis, and they are more likely to trust this information. And among those that encounter this information, 6 in 10 say it encouraged them to make a healthier choice. And I say this because while this particular question is about food, this concept could certainly be applied to other packaged consumer goods that are non-food. And seeing information online, getting recommendations that point you directly or take you directly to a site to help you purchase, that's something that particularly right now, Cyber Monday, it's happening and happening on a regular basis. And then finally, what about trust? And so when it comes to food, what to eat and avoid, people are looking to credentialed health professionals, whether that's a registered dietitian, their personal healthcare professional, a wellness coach. They're looking for credentialed experts. And so the challenge is to get science-based information on any of these topics into the hands of those credentialed experts and make sure that people are coming into contact with them in a way that those credentialed experts can point them to on-package information that they can use to help make informed decisions about what they choose to purchase for themselves and their families, or point them, maybe even give them a straight up recommendation and make sure that in fact they're taking steps and having access to information to help them make decisions that are in line with their values. This does get to the challenge of it, which is and gets to this issue of trust. Is it's very difficult to trust anyone when they keep changing, or it seems like they keep changing their mind. And so we know that science shifts and changes and evolves, and that's just very much the nature of science. This is a challenge for us, and so as things ebb and flow, we will need to address this challenge through off-label communications in many respects, because on-label communications is highly regulated, and it does take time for it to evolve as well. And
Wendy,
then,
thank you so
yep,
much.
yep,
Unfortunately, we're
you got it.
coming up on time and want to be fair to all of our panelists. But
You got it.
I think, this just goes to show, I mean, how, first of all, how much important data there does currently exist regarding, what consumers are looking for, how much information they have to sift through,
Yes.
and how what they're looking for changes over time. It's really, really interesting to see, and particularly so because this is over a long period of time, right? You all have been doing these consumer surveys for over 20 years, as you mentioned. So very exciting to kind of set the stage in terms of, how much information exists, how much consumers are looking for, and thank you for sharing your
Yeah.
contact information. As Wendy mentioned, all of this information lives out on the IFIC website, and Wendy here for our Q&A portion, but move on to our next presenter, John Phillips. Uh, again, very excited to have John here, who will talk about PepsiCo's smart packaging strategy. John, over to you.
Great, thanks, Rishi. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity today to share a little bit about PepsiCo's smart packaging journey. What I always try to do when we have a discussion like this is give a little bit of background, knowing that folks will have different levels of understanding. First thing, just from a level setting standpoint, almost 2 years ago now, we hit the 50th anniversary of the current EAN UPC barcode. Most of us on this call probably recognize the connection with the beep at the register at the front end of the checkout. But that single barcode has enabled a number of different business processes around order fulfillment, category management, demand planning, et cetera. Fast forward, there's a new global standard that's been established and ratified called the GS1 Digital Link. The simplest way to remember it is it's a mashup of taking everything the UPC today can do, which is pretty basic, right? It identifies the manufacturer and the product. It has a check digit, which makes sure that red laser measures the distance between the linear lines correctly. But it also now will actually evolve to a 2D data carrier that'll have everything the UPC has, so it can run the register at the front of the store, but also all of the capabilities of a QR code. And what that allows us to do is enable a host of new use cases around nutritional information, regulatory certification, sustainability, traceability, many of the things we just saw that consumers are putting at the top of their queue in purchasing decisions. So just to give you a little more detail, if you haven't seen the new data standard, this is what it looks like in what's called a data payload. This is what would be loaded if you used all of the standard. My first disclaimer is in this example, a lot of products in the store will not use all the attributes. Primarily the center store will use things like the G10 and the URL, but they're not going to go jump to dynamically coding everything. The manufacturing processes do not support that at this time. But perimeter departments, perishables, things like that, think of meat, produce, dairy, deli, that already variably label at store level will be able to use more of that standard sooner. To give you an idea how the pieces work, first, every product in the future will have a URL. It might be a single landing page, it might be a smart label page, it'll have a page that allows the consumer to know a bit more about the product they're purchasing. Next, we'll still be able to run the register, so the G10 will be part of the information that's shared. For those products that justify it, again, primarily the perimeter of the store, things like the batch lot code or even the expiry date can be included in that data payload. So think of those labels you see on a package of meat or, the deli case. What that allows us to do then is at the front of the store, if retailers enhance their point of sale systems, they could block a package of meat that's expired from ever leaving the store. And then on the back of the store, there's also processes that can be enabled by this new data payload. So think of if you've ever kind of worked at a supermarket, one of the first things you do in the perishable departments is what's called cull the cases. So you go through all of the cases, check expiry dates, rotate product. By being able to scan a 2D code and have a simple green and red screen that pops up, you can speed up a number of those processes. And like I said, the implementation of the digital link will really be category and product dependent. And again, it's going to take a while. You'll hear, and I'll talk about it in a little bit, about something called Sunrise 2027. But changes like this take a number of years to fully kind of evolve throughout the system. But it's going to depend on how those products are produced, what are the line speeds, et cetera, that'll justify how much variable data you put into the code. At PepsiCo, our strategy around smart packaging really focuses on three pillars: expanding consumer transparency, enabling much more comprehensive digital disclosure of regulatory certifications, and then really setting a flexible foundation around consumer engagement. These are all the use cases that we already have in place today. And the piece I will stress, you can get started today. It doesn't mean you have to go say, hey, I'm not ready to go do the digital link. Remember, Smart Label's been out there for 10 years. So we're using a dynamic QR code, so a QR code that we can change kind of in the background to enable enhanced nutritional labeling, regulatory disclosure, certifications, which are becoming more and more important to consumers, as we just heard. Have multi-packs be smarter, smart recalls being attached to the products, and then being able to expand the information we share with consumers around recycling and sustainability. The way Smart Label works, if you haven't experienced it yourself, there's a common call to action, and that's really the magic in driving adoption in the US. Because we all use a common call to action on the package, you can see here, and I used a single serve bottle of beverages because the question is, well, will it fit? You can pretty much put it on any size package once you learn how to engineer it. But the consumer can actually scan that code in the aisle or in their cupboard at home. And then they get one of two experiences. They get what's called a curated intermediate menu, which is a PepsiCo creation, or what's called the base smart label page. And both of them provide a wealth of information for the consumer. If you've never seen it, all these QR codes I'm going to show you are live, so feel free with your iOS camera or your Android device to scan the codes, but I'll just show you a quick little walkthrough if you've never been through a full kind of, curated menu for a product. So if I open my phone and scan the QR code, I will get the curated menu. If I click the first button, which is Smart Label, I get the digital nutritional panel, but then I get a lot more information. All of the ingredients are defined for that product, including why they're in there in many cases. Any known allergens are called out. We include any health and safety claims that need to be identified, and then we click either through email or through the phone the ability to contact our consumer affairs without even having to look for a phone number. The next button is our brand information. All of our brands put together incredible information that most consumers never see. We can now attach it to our products. The third one, recycling, becomes a bigger and bigger focus point for many consumers. So why not start to attach that to the product? What are you doing with those products? Are you using 100% recycled PET? Are you getting rid of plastic rings? And then many consumers want to know broadly, what is your overall sustainability and ESG strategy? That may be around sustainable agriculture, et cetera. And then last, first party loyalty. You're able to attach an opt in on the product to engage consumers more interactively. And then the bottom, what we try to do is engage consumers by connecting all of our social media channels, whether it's X or whether it's Instagram, the ability on that package, right, to click Facebook or click Twitter and instantly follow that particular brand on those channels creates a degree of stickiness and also creates a lot of engagement with consumers and getting more and more information. Disclosures from a regulatory standpoint are really the future of digital labeling. And one of the success stories we've had is with bioengineering, the ability with digital disclosure to communicate when a product has a bioengineered ingredient. In working with AMS, we were able to go get a framework where on a single scan, and if you scan this, you will see you don't have to click, you don't have to go search for anything. Regardless of the format, whether it's the base smart label page or the curated intermediate menu, the first thing you see in that product header is that bioengineering disclosure. So it's easy for the consumer to recognize and they don't have to go look for it. Certifications are another one. One of our CMOs, when I was trying to convince them to lean in on Smart Label, said, "Hey, John, I finally got it. If I don't do this, my packages are going to look like NASCAR or a Formula One car with all of the certifications that are coming out." So working with Rishi and the CBA, we created a certifications button that now allows us to create a much more intuitive and much more informative digital experience for consumers. And again, you can scan it. I'll show you what it looks like here. If we were to go scan that QR code on our phone, we would be able to go actually see all of the certifications in a very interactive way. So if we click the little check mark up there with the blue, and say, hey, let me see the certifications, we now see all of the same badges that are on the package. But now is where it really gets interesting. Because it's digital, I can now have those certifications take the consumer to places like the non-GMO verified site where they don't have to believe PepsiCo. They can go to the governing body and see, how does the program work? How is it regulated? How is it audited? And this is something you could never do in a physical package. There isn't the space, yet we're able to organize it in a very intuitive, easy to follow way for a consumer in a digital format. Multi-packs exploded during COVID. Smart packaging allows you to have an individual nutritional label for every single component in a multi-pack that's all structured the same way, again, off of a single QR code scan. And then recalls. PepsiCo created a concept called Smart Digital Recalls, and actually was the first CPG company in the US to use it as part of an FDA communication letter. And the concept is based on when you have a product that does unfortunately have an issue versus waiting for all the traditional channels within a very short period of time, 20, 30 minutes, we can actually change the experience for the consumer. So again, if you want to follow along, but this is what it looks like. If you were to scan that QR code, again, you would get now a menu, but right at the top, you'd get an alert, in bold red at the top that says, hey, recall alert, click here. And then it clearly lays out what the recall information is. So what's the nature of the recall? What is the issue with it? What products are affected? What's the UPC, the code date, the size of the product, the manufacturing code? And the manufacturing code is a really interesting piece because our consumer affairs group tells us, hey, it's one of the biggest things consumers can struggle with. But in digital, we're able to take a picture of the inner pack and outer pack and make it extremely easy for them to read it. And then last, include a link to the actual recall site where they can find out how they dispose or get credit for the product. And again, think about it this way. We can change that experience for the consumer even when that product's in their cupboard at home, or if they're in the store, they hear about something on the news and they want to know, hey, is this product impacted? I even had launch of the smart recall and say, hey, the ability to see what products are affected for websites and retailer websites. Concept that we came up with called embedded frames. And let me show you what it looks like here on the Lay's site from a Frito-Lay standpoint. So if you were to go there and actually click on Lay's and then click nutritional facts, we actually embed directly on the web page a fully navigatable version of Smart Labels. So all of the information I just showed you on the nutritional panel, the ingredients, the ingredient definitions, allergens, any kind of safety claims, the ability to contact consumer affairs, all of that information is there. And it's a single version of the truth. It's the exact same data that is driving the digital experience on your phone. But now any website that embeds that has the latest information and it's constantly up to date if anything changes. And then again, the consumer is done with it or isn't interested that on a particular trip, you're not tying up real estate on the website. You can actually click and make it go away. And retailers are also starting to use this information. We worked with Jim Flannery. Many of you may know him from the industry, longtime P&Ger, worked at CBA for a while. He was leading, and I still think he is, leading transformation for DECA. So think of all of the large grocery stores the military operates. And we worked with NCR to actually build in their platform the ability to actually have a selectable feature that embeds an embedded frame of smart label data whenever it's available. So somebody like DECA that might not have a big a big product data group, they're able to get good product content with great product imagery. Placement of 2D codes is pretty important as you start to get ready for the digital link. It doesn't mean you have to start, and my recommendation is actually to start with the basic QR code. But one, for Smart Label, it needs to be under the domicile statement on the nutritional panel, number one, that's required. And then secondly, you want to start making sure that it's within 2 inches of the center point of the linear barcode. The reason why that's important is at the point in time we change what we put in that 2D code to the digital link, it needs to be within that 2 inch radius to make sure we don't have double scans or latency at the checkout in the front of the store. And again, you'll hear of something called Sunrise 2027. I use this as a little bit of a fun chart just to make sure people keep perspective. What that's meant to be is, hey, let's all get started, meaning retailers start getting optical scanning capability in your store so you can start reading these 2D codes with the UPC. A manufacturer start getting 2D codes on the package, get them in the right place. But it isn't meant to be a solar flare, meaning we're not going to go flip the switch. This will take probably 7 to 10 years to really get critical mass within the industry, but you have to start at some point. And really, it's a crawl, walk, run. And my direction to folks when they ask me is, hey, from a crawl standpoint, if you're a CPG, start building muscle around 2D codes, right? Get engaged with Smart Label, get a 2D code on your package along with the current UPC barcode. Retailers, as they get started, they need to go look at their hardware refresh cycle. I wouldn't go do it out of a refresh cycle. But hey, the next time you're touching your scanners, if they're not optical at this point, how do you make sure you're updating them with optical hardware? And then also you got the game plan to update your firmware and software to read that UPC from the 2D code. Second step is what I call walk, right? Once you get it on the package and in the right place, how do you get good at the content you put together for your consumer? And every brand, every product has a little bit different kind of focus. How do you make sure you're building the capability to share that content in a curated digital menu? The good part about it, what we learned is most of this content, meaning 95% of it exists already. It's just organizing in a way where you actually attach it to the product. And then retailers may be able to move a little faster than brands because they have a closed supply chain, just their products in their stores. They may be able to pull off that linear barcode a bit sooner than brands will because brands are going to have to make sure it works across all different sizes and channels of trade. And then last, from a run standpoint, before we go switch to the digital link, what I always encourage people to say is you really got to make sure that all of your retailers are ready to scan that digital link in the different data payload, because once you start doing that, if they're not ready, you run the risk of double scans, you run this risk of latency at the front of the store. So it's important that you get it all ready so you can flip that switch easily. If you get it on the package, you get it in the right place, that last step of swapping out the digital link is actually pretty easy because you will have already done the heavy lifting work. And then retailers, once they get to that run stage, right, get everything stabilized, they can start looking at, hey, does it make sense in the perishable departments or for high risk products to look at including expiry or batch lot code for those products that they variably label at store today already, where it wouldn't be a significant cost or big time commitment. And again, it's a journey, so don't be overwhelmed. We started, 10 years ago, but it's really a journey that you just got to get started. Most folks still are in the first bucket there where they just have the linear barcode of the UPC on the package. Where we're at now with PepsiCo, almost 75% of our products now have both a 2D code and the linear barcode, which is allowing us to do a lot of neat things. And then last, somewhere down the road, it might be 10 years out, once all the retailers are ready and all channels of trade are ready, we'll be able to start pulling that linear barcode off the package, and you'll have a single 2D code that'll not only drive the register with the digital link, but it'll drive all of the consumer engagement experiences. So to wrap things up, hopefully in this short 20 minutes, you can see that smart packaging really creates a curated product experience that'll transform fundamentally how consumers engage with products. And I think the nutritional information alone is a great example. There's no way you could fit this physically on the label itself, and digital is really the enabler that brings it all to life. And again, we're just scratching the surface, right, on product information, regulatory compliance, recalls, recycling, and brand engagement. The neat part when you build this capability within your organization, it's highly flexible and pliable to change over time. And that single QR code really makes sure that your packages are future proof, right? As things change, or maybe you have a holiday communication or some neat sporting event you're tying into, you're able to go literally change a button on your package and immediately have that information in the consumer's hands. And really, smart packaging also can be a key component in enhancing traceability across all channels of trade by the information we can share. But GS1 Digital Link really in the future will create breakthrough capabilities across all products. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rishi.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. And thanks for kind of sharing the future of, 2D barcodes and smart label. Importantly, this idea that you have this kind of single source of truth for consumers, as well as, for the CPG industry and for retailers. Everything is consolidated into this single activation point, which is that 2D barcode or, QR code, and the ability for it to do multiple things at the same time. Um, uh, Excellent. Great. So with that, our final speaker, Scott Mobley from Clorox. Scott, over to you.
Thank you for having me as part of the panel. And as we've heard from both Wendy and John, consumer transparency can take on many different forms. And the way in which one organization approaches transparency is not going to be exactly the same way as how another organization or company does it. And that's actually a good thing because each organization's consumers are going to be different, and each organization needs to communicate with their consumer in a way that's really authentic to that particular organization or company. So what I'd like to do today is provide a few examples of how the cleaning industry and my company, Clorox, have approached consumer transparency with a focus on ingredients and ingredient transparency. So for a little bit of history of the Clorox Company, we were founded as the Clorox Electro-Alkaline Company in 1913 in Oakland, California, where we still have our headquarters. And we've been in business for 112 years, and probably not a surprise to many of you that our first product was bleach. And here you can see a picture of our original manufacturing facility. And an interesting point around this is that it was located adjacent to the San Francisco Bay because it provided an endless source of saltwater brine, which was a key component of making bleach in the early days. So as you can see, one of our original delivery trucks with large containers in the back, and one of the first uses of Clorox bleach was for commercial use at walnut processing plants that were common in the area at the time. So if you've ever worked with walnuts fresh from the tree, you know that they stain. There's this dark natural dye in outer green husks. And bleach was great for combating those stains and keeping the processing plants sanitary. From those humble beginnings, we've grown to a $7 billion company with over 7,600 employees, and we're operating in around 100 companies around the world with a variety of brands. Go ahead and advance the slide, please. The first thing that probably comes to your mind when you hear the name Clorox is likely bleach. And you are right, we certainly make bleach, but we're much more than bleach. You can advance the slide. We have a variety of cleaning product brands, some of which you can see over there on the left of the screen, but we also have many different brands that you may not realize are also Clorox brands. We have a foods business with Hidden Valley Ranch being our most notable food brand, and Burt's Bees Natural Personal Care is one of our brands. And you can see a few more examples of products and brands that the public does not typically associate with Clorox. Within the context of transparency, there can be a big difference between what information the consumers of the various brands want or expect. For example, the Kingsford charcoal consumer, it's typically a middle-aged male whose interest in using the product is really about pleasing their family or guests with a delicious barbecue, right? So they're really thinking about the emotional parts of using that brand. And so we don't get a lot of inquiries from our Kingsford charcoal consumer specific to ingredient transparency. And you can compare that with the mom who's feeding her children Hidden Valley Ranch salad dressing, and they have very different expectations about what you communicate with them about their ingredients, about the product's ingredients. So it's important to understand what a particular brand's consumer wants from us as a manufacturer because not one size fits all. But today I'm going to focus primarily on how we have engaged over the years with transparency initiatives for cleaning product ingredients, and then at the end talk a little bit about a Burt's Bees project on supply chain transparency. Next slide, please. At Clorox, we've actually recognized that consumer transparency is something that we need to continue to keep it front and center as a core element on how we do business and build and maintain consumer trust. So much so that we've actually embedded transparency into our overall corporate strategy, which we call Ignite. So we have 3 ESG pillars as part of our Ignite strategy, and there are several different goals under each of those pillars. And under the Healthy Lives pillar, we specifically call out product stewardship and our commitment to ingredient transparency. In that blue rectangle at the bottom, you can read it here, but the idea is that we're committed to giving consumers the information that they need when selecting products that allow them to make the choices that are right for themselves and their families. And this is actually a public commitment. It gets tracked. These goals have visibility at our C-suite level in the company, and we're being held accountable for making sure that we're delivering upon that part of our strategy. Next slide, please. If you look at this timeline, you'll see that ingredient transparency initiatives are not new for Clorox or the cleaning products industry. Some of these are Clorox specific initiatives, and some of them are initiatives that involve the cleaning products industry in general, often being led by industry working together through trade associations. So you can go all the way back to the 1990s when some of you might remember that this is when the EPA started working on their Design for the Environment program, which has a strong ingredient transparency component to it. Clorox was part of the stakeholder work that went into setting program attributes for what ultimately became the Design for the Environment standard. And I'll talk a little bit more about this program in the later slides. Clorox's first big initiatives was in 2008 when we came out with our GreenWorks line of naturally derived cleaners. And as part of this launch, we introduced our Ingredients Inside program that provided the public with information on all the cleaning ingredients in that product line. And that was important because GreenWorks was the first line of mainstream cleaning products to do this. And up until then, it was only some small niche brands that were specifically designed for the sustainability-centric consumer that did this. And then a year later in 2009, we extended this program to all of our US and Canadian cleaning products that we sold in those two countries. And it wasn't long after that that during the next few years, as a cleaning products industry, we came together to work on consumer transparency initiatives, one of which was the American Cleaning Institute's ingredient inventory, another, and I'll cover that as well in a future slide. So during these early years, there had been lots of progress made on sharing information with consumers on the ingredients that were responsible for the cleaning function of a product, but ingredients that were present in the fragrances used in those products were generally not being shared. And the fragrance suppliers were reluctant to share that because that was really their secret sauce. But the consumer demand was really getting louder to know more about these fragrance ingredients. In 2014, we as Clorox took another step in transparency by becoming the first major cleaning products company to voluntarily disclose fragrance ingredients. And a year later, there was the introduction of Smart Label, which John had talked a bit about, and that further advanced the consumer transparency. In 2017, there was another trade association, the Household and Consumer Products Association, put their ingredient dictionary online, and that was really to help manufacturers deliver on their transparency initiatives. But the real game changer came in 2019 when California passed the Cleaning Products Right to Know Act, which made mandatory for any cleaning product sold in the state of California to disclose more information on ingredients than any cleaning product had voluntarily been disclosing up until that time. And we're still living under those requirements for this California law with enhanced ingredient information appearing on product labels or online to comply with this law. Fortunately, Smart Label was quick to adapt to that California law to where the online disclosure requirements could be met through the use of Smart Label. And in 2020, we as Clorox put all of our cleaning products on Smart Label as the way in which we were going to source our ingredient information and more to meet the law. And then the past 5 years, there's been additional industry work that's included the evolution of the American Cleaning Institute's cleaning catalog and other initiatives as well. So I spend a lot of time on this slide because I think it's really important that we all realize that over the past 30 years, the industry and Clorox and other companies in the cleaning product industry have been working on ingredient transparency, and it is not new. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, trade associations have been an integral part of the transparency work, and consumer brands Smart Label program has certainly been one of the leaders in this area. And John provided an excellent overview of all of the capabilities that Smart Label has and that support consumer transparency. And really, this consistent format of Smart Label is one of the most useful hallmarks of the program, right? A consumer knows where on the Smart Label pages they can get specific information, and it'll appear there no matter what product they're looking at, whether it's a food or a cleaning product or what have you. So for Clorox, Smart Label is one of the most important ways that we provide our consumers with detailed transparency information about our cleaning products. And currently we have about 500 product listings on Smart Label. Next slide, please. But it's not only important to participate in these types of transparency initiatives, but also to really publicize the support for the programs and being an amplifying voice. So on the right's an example of a tweet that we sent out from our corporate Twitter or X account where we featured Smart Label and our support of the program. And I encourage all of you who are working with your comms teams to be vocal on your organization's participation in Smart Label or other programs that support consumer transparency. Next slide, please. American Cleaning Institute's another example of a trade association that promotes transparency. ACI is a US-based trade association that represents companies in the retail and professional cleaning and disinfecting products sector. And ACI and their members, which we are a member at Clorox, we have developed the Cleaning Chemistry Catalog, which any consumer can access through the ACI site. And one of the capabilities of the catalog is that a consumer can look up the ingredients that are used in the company's cleaning products portfolio. For example, if a consumer would go to the site and enter Clorox in the search window, it takes them to a link in Smart Label that lists our cleaning and disinfecting products. And if you click on a product name, it takes the consumers to a link in the ingredients for that particular product. Next slide, please. So that's how the consumer would be able to find a list of ingredients in a product, but there's also a section of the cleaning chemistry catalog that helps consumers understand what the common cleaning product ingredients actually do. For example, a consumer might hear a technical term that's associated with a cleaning product, but not know exactly what that ingredient is or it does. So the catalog has this ingredients function section that gives a layman's explanation for the common function of that ingredient. For example, for an enzyme, it describes it in simple, easy to understand language, what it does, right? Enzymes help break down substances such as grass stains blood, etc. And the ingredient function section doesn't try to overcomplicate the explanation of the ingredient's function in this part of the catalog. Next slide, please. However, for the consumer who wants even more information, the catalog tries to help that consumer as well. So cleaning product labels, like other product labels, whether it's foods, drugs, dietary supplements, what have you, they can contain chemical names that a consumer may have no idea what that ingredient is. If a consumer wants to look up that ingredient, the catalog also has a glossary where a detailed description of over 80 of the most common cleaning product ingredients the consumer may find on a label are listed with their technical description. So for the consumer who is really interested in product ingredients and wants to really dig deeper into understanding what an ingredient is or does, the glossary provides that information. So the point that I hope you take away from this cleaning chemistry catalog discussion is that this particular tool can address ingredient transparency at different technical levels matched to the level that the consumer wants to engage. If they only want to know what ingredients a company uses in their cleaning products, they can look up a company name. If they want a bit more interested, they can go to the ingredient function. If they really want the technical details, they can use the glossary. And again, important to meet the consumer where they are on their quest for ingredient transparency information. Next slide, please. There's a third trade association initiative that I want to briefly touch base on because it supports transparency in a different way with a different audience. Whereas the ACI cleaning catalog is specifically directed to the consumer, the Household and Commercial Cleaning Products Association's ingredient dictionary is targeted to manufacturers and brand owners. The dictionary is a subscription-based online searchable database that contains information on nearly 2,000 ingredients that are used in household and commercial products. So Clorox and other HCPA members contributed information to help develop this database. And the dictionary is especially helpful for producers for use of a standardized nomenclature of an ingredient or a proprietary mixture. So for example, if you look at the blue arrow, if a manufacturer would happen to use this ingredient called Bioturge PAS8S as an ingredient in their formulation, they may not know the chemical makeup of that ingredient. But if you look at the green box, you can see that the active in this ingredient can go by many different names. 1-methylene ethanol, 2-hydroxypropane, and on down the line. But if as manufacturers, we all choose to use a different name when talking about the same ingredient, it's very confusing to the consumer, and it's really the opposite of consumer transparency. So manufacturers who've committed to follow the nomenclature of the HCPA ingredient dictionary have agreed to use the standardized naming convention when using the same ingredient. So in this example, as seen in the orange circle, we would all use the term isopropanol unless we're working under a regulation that requires us to use a different naming convention. And the dictionary also has many other capabilities that I didn't talk about, but for the purpose of today's discussion, I wanted to show you how the dictionary can support manufacturers in their transparency efforts. Next slide, please. There's also government programs committed to consumer transparency that companies like Clorox participate in, and one of those is the EPA's Safer Choice program. Earlier, when I was walking through the timeline, you may recall that I referred to EPA's Design for the Environment program as one of the early programs that started to address product and ingredient transparency in the 1990s. And that program has evolved to include Safer Choice. And these are certification programs that manufacturers can submit product information to the EPA, including a full ingredient disclosure list, and the EPA will assess that product and the safety profile of every ingredient in that formulation against the program standards. And if the product meets the standards, that product becomes a certified product under the Safer Choice or DFE program. And if a company chooses to do so, they can display that program logo on their product to indicate that the product is certified. And certifications from credible third parties can be mechanisms of transparency in and of themselves, but an important feature of the Safer Choice and the DFE program is their safer chemical ingredient list, or as it's commonly known as the SKIL. Next slide, please. And the SKIL is a list of ingredients that have been considered in formulas evaluated in the Safer Choice or the DFE program. And it's a public website. And the program website lists all of these ingredients by name, their CAS number, and their functional use. And it also shows the safety profile of each of the ingredients as rated by the EPA's Safer Choice program. And the rating goes from a full green circle, meaning that the ingredient is the lowest of concern, to a gray square, which means that the ingredient is not acceptable for use. A useful transparency aspect of this rating system is that the EPA is not just making a not safe judgment, but the assessment is made compared to other ingredients that are used for the same purpose. And in this example, the purpose is a defoaming agent. So for example, if a consumer sees 3-phenylpropanol on a product label and wants to know more about it, they can go to the Safer Choice website and they'll see that that particular ingredient's a defoaming agent, and they can see how that particular defoaming agent stacks up against other defoaming agents in the eyes of the Safer Choice program. And the consumer's provided with information that they can make that comparison. And while most consumers are satisfied just knowing that a product is certified by the EPA, the SKIL allows for additional transparency for the consumer who really wants to know more. Next slide, please. And Clorox, we've been a big and vocal supporter of the Safer Choice program, and for that, we've been recognized 7 different times for being a partner of the year. Next slide, please. So up to this point, I've been talking about consumer transparency within the context of ingredient transparency in cleaning products. But of course, there are other ways to approach transparency as well. And I want to finish up by giving you an example of a supply chain transparency initiative that we embarked upon for our Burt's Bees brand. Bert was a real person and one of the co-founders of the brand back in the mid-1980s. And this is a picture of Bert looking at bees on a beehive frame. He's also the person that you see in the stylized logo on our Burt's Bees products. And he was a beekeeper, and the beeswax from his hives was the source of beeswax used in the original Burt's Bees products. And beeswax continues to be an important ingredient of many Burt's Bees products to this day. So,
Just about a minute left.
yep, and I'm going to be right on time, Rishi. When I first started this talk, I mentioned that depending upon the type of product and how it was used and the consumer who's using it, there can be very different expectations from the consumer on how that brand communicates transparency and what they communicate. And as a natural personal care brand, that also has the important sustainability heritage. So would just direct you to a YouTube site where we work with some beeswax suppliers in Tanzania to still provide some of our beeswax. And there's on YouTube from the source beeswax, very interesting way in how we communicate with our consumer about this supply chain initiative. Next slide and final slide. I'm just hoping I'll be able to provide you with a few examples of how we've engaged in consumer transparency over the years. Not a new initiative for us or the industry. And there are many different ways to support transparency and many different organizations. And really, the most important thing is not so much on how you choose to approach transparency, but really do what works for you and your organization to do what works for your consumer. And with that, I will hand it back to you, Rishi.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. And really appreciate you sharing your journey. In this kind of transparency space, even before Smart Label, and certainly with the advent of Smart Label and beyond. So excellent. And so welcome back to our to all of our speakers. Thank you all so much for sharing these great insights, sharing the data, sharing these very cool demos and use cases, and the stories as well. So with that, we're here at our Q&A portion of our webinar. So just reminding everyone, feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. You're also welcome to use the Q&A function in the chat. So maybe, John, we'll start with you. I've got a couple questions to kick us off here. So have there been any measurable effects from implementing Smart Label or using, kind of smart packaging? Are there any kind of metrics that you're able to share?
Yeah, no, great question, Rishi, and also ties to one of the questions in the Q&A about, are consumers using the tools? And you can probably share the aggregate, but at PepsiCo alone, we have multiple millions of consumers that are regularly scanning those packages on an ongoing basis. And year over year, we keep seeing growth. So, as people get more and more familiar with, hey, Smart Label tells me I've got a digital label that'll give me more, you're seeing at least from our packages, more and more consumers engaging in the content. I think the key to it as brand owners is you got to keep it fresh, you got to keep it accurate, and to all the points Wendy said, keep making it relevant, right? Make sure you're trying to go bring out and kind of highlight the components that they are looking for in part of their purchasing decision.
No, great point. And I can also mention, yeah, in aggregate, the Smart Label, and just based on the data that we receive, and truthfully, we don't receive all the data, but brands report into us voluntarily. We get about 22 million page views annually, and then the about average time that a consumer spends on a Smart Label page is about 90 seconds, which is significant. It's longer than most TikToks, and that amount of time continues to grow. Awesome. Um, Scott, for you, so you shared a couple of examples, but maybe if there's some others that you're thinking about, I mean, in terms of how industry can proactively shape the policy discussion around transparency, again, you're doing some great storytelling. Maybe if you can expand on that.
Yeah, these trans I think there's two ways to think about it, right? One is voluntarily. What do you want to do as a company? But when there is regulation or bills that are being put forward as a company or as an organization, you really need to get your voice in there and shape that, right? And John talked a little bit about the work that was done on the food side for some of the badges and that sort of thing, and where you're able to disclose, and that was based on a lot of work that the industry had done to really work with regulators to say, hey, here's our problem, here's what we're trying to help you solve, but there might be a different way to do it than what the bill originator or the regulatory agent was thinking about, and really helping them understand that. And you can sometimes come up with a win-win there. Not always, but sometimes, but you have to get your voice in there to help shape what the final version is that comes out.
And I think as we've seen here today, generally there's a good story to tell. There's so much information that consumers are looking for, and it's being made available. And it's being made available in an accessible way, in a standardized way, and in a way that ideally helps continue to grow that trust. Excuse me. Speaking of trust, so Wendy, question for you. So again, since you have all of this data over a significant period of time, how has transparency evolved as a driver of consumer trust over the past couple decades?
I would say we were looking to do some new research that's specifically getting to that. I think what we see is consumers are increasingly interested in lots of information, and there's just no way to communicate that in a way that's relevant to all different consumer related vertical subsets or in different verticals in a way that's going to be able to be, as it was noted, kind of, John, you mentioned looking like a race car. It just would be, I think that would contribute actually to diminished trust, given how confusing and or frenetic that would appear, if you will. So we see that consumers are wanting cleaner labels, meaning less things on them, if you will. And so they desire that. And so this is certainly a relevant place. I think consumers are going to continue to have more questions about their food and or their products and where they come from and why. I love these ingredient kind of glossaries, if you will, or for both products that were mentioned, because consumers don't just want to know it's there, they want to know why. And so when you talk to somebody about most things and you say like you explained why, you must be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Even if they're seeking something different or more, is it's an opportunity to actually engage on a very meaningful level with consumers, which then in turn would inspire trust. So a roundabout way to say, I don't think this is changing. I think consumers are going to be interested, continue to be interested in more things. And so certainly opportunities like this provide you to be able to give information, tell stories, and connect more deeply with consumers, inspiring
Absolutely.
relationship.
Absolutely. And you're right. I mean, different pieces of information are going to be of interest to different consumers. There's a question here about data regarding what consumers are looking for in the future from Smart Label. So I can share just historically, again, the information that goes beyond the label is the most frequently accessed information. So things like ingredient definitions, more detailed allergen information, sourcing information, you know, those certifications, explanations of those certifications, those are some of the top things that consumers are looking for. Does anyone want to touch on, maybe the future? What do we think?
Rishi, this is Wendy. Just briefly, is we did some research on recalls and asked about connecting information, whether that be to their shopper loyalty card or even to something like this. And people are very open to this. And so I think this is an amazing way to help people take action right away. Because even if people hear something's recalled, they're not actually taking action or they're like giving it to their pet. So we don't want either. We want them to do something.
Great. John, you touched on it briefly, so some of the recall capabilities with smart packaging and smart label. Do you want to kind of double click on that?
I think just building on what Wendy said, the first smart digital recall we did, we had hundreds of thousands of consumers that within a matter of days scanned those packages. So I think the behavior's there. We just got to go drive some standardization in the industry. Right now I would say we're kind of on the cutting edge of it. I think where it would really gain momentum, and it backs up what Wendy's saying, is if all brands leaned in and said, hey, whatever this class recalled, they'll always also be smart. Consumers would immediately hear about something on the news or to your point, a loyalty card email or text or whatever, and then just hit the package and say, hey, is my package affected? That's transformational to me if we can get the
Mhm.
industry moving in that direction. The foundation's there, Rishi. We just got to get everybody moving.
Yeah, thank you. There's a great question in here around nutrition literacy and education and how important it is. Um, simply having more information may not translate into decision making. So even though it's not the industry's responsibility to educate consumers, how can brands meaningfully support broader education efforts? And one thing I'll mention here is that at least in Smart Label, many brands are linking directly out to USDA's MyPlate and dietary guidelines for Americans. And I think those are both excellent nutrition literacy resources for consumers. But I wanted to open this up here for anyone.
I
Okay.
don't want to speak on behalf of brands, but I would just say that in a lot of our research, we are utilizing FDA's nutrition literacy um, quiz just to try to understand what you're saying, particularly as there's so many federally based initiatives around food and nutrition information and on pack information. So I'm in strong agreement with you that information alone doesn't necessarily translate into behavior change or but that's why I think the off-label communication piece is so important. I think looking at um, lots of sources where are consumers finding their information. Some of it's going to be online, some of it's with healthcare professionals. So there's so many places that consumers can receive information. Partnering with those trusted sources, I think, are a great way to help inform people about even what we're talking about here, but also how to make healthful choices for them and their families that are aligned with their values.
Absolutely, and that point about trusted sources is an important one because there is so much misinformation out there these days. There are um, different sources that claim to say whether something is good for you or bad for you, and they're pulling in the product data from it's unclear where and frequently is out of date, and so that poses a huge challenge for consumers who are looking for just product information and they want to make better informed choices, and so again, this is an opportunity for Smart Label to play a role in that all of that product data comes directly from each brand owner. So that's, I think, just an important distinction there. So I know we're a bit over time, but we've had such great information, content, discussion, data. So have really, really enjoyed it. And again, excited to have all of these leaders join us for our inaugural National Consumer Transparency Week. This is a kind of a cornerstone initiative of our industry and has been for quite some time. We're excited to have a spotlight on it and provide some airtime to what is already being done, what are consumers looking for, and importantly, how all of that will continue to change and evolve into the future. So with that, I'm happy to close things out and once again thank all of our speakers, Wendy, John, Scott. Thank you all for your presentations, for sharing your stories, for sharing your data, and for sharing your demos. Really enjoyed it. And hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the week and stay tuned for more communication, more data around consumer transparency. Lots more to come here. And again, this is the week this is our kind of putting our flagpole in the ground and shedding some light on consumer transparency and what's been done and what's more to come. So again, with that, thank you all, and hope you have a wonderful rest of the week.